Shadow Slave. By Guiltythree. Chapter 1305, House of Parting. This is the House of Parting. It is the furthest point of Weave as one travels upstream. Anank's voice sounded uncharacteristically dispirited. House of Parting. Sunny studied the artificial island and the solemn structure built upon it, then turned to the old woman and asked, "It's a windmill?" She nodded. "Yes, my lord. The tower harvests the wind to maintain the island." Anank lingered for a second, and then added, "The cities of the Great River are actually more akin to flotillas, each consisting of many city ships, some small like this one, some spanning dozens of kilometers across. They migrate sometimes, but mostly they have to stay in place. There is nothing to anchor a ship to on the Great River, though." Nephi's raised an eyebrow. "Is the Great River so deep that no anchor can reach its bottom?" Anank shook her head. "It is not that the floor of the Great River is too deep, it's that it doesn't exist. No one has ever managed to reach it, at least. So, we had to find other ways." She pointed to the rotating blades of the towering windmill. "There are various ways to make a city ship resist the current, from mundane ones to magical. The House of Parting. You can't see it from here, but there is a great water wheel at the back of the island, constantly propelling it forward at the same speed as the river pushes it back. Its mechanism is mostly powered by the current itself, but the windmill lightens the burden significantly." She sighed. "The island's mechanism is on the brink of collapse, now. I've tried to repair it as well as I could, but my knowledge is insufficient to keep an entire city from breaking apart. There's little point to, anyway." Sunny and Nephi's looked at the dark windmill, feeling a sense of awe. The island in front of them was actually the creation of incredible human ingenuity, a floating city district that used the wind and the power of the Great River itself to fight against the currents of time. Even now that the people of Weave were gone, it was still pushing forward, refusing to become a thing of the past. The ketch approached the island in solemn silence. As it drew close, Anank released the wind filling the sails, skillfully guided the boat to the pier, and moored it to the pier with a piece of rope. The three of them left the small ketch for the first time in a long, long while. Feeling the sturdy wooden planks of the pier under his feet, Sunny enjoyed the fact that the ground was not swaying and took a few steps. He was swaying like a drunk himself for the first couple, but then regained his balance. As he stretched his limbs, Nephi's looked around and asked, "The House of Parting. Why was this place given such a name?" Anank smiled faintly as she headed toward the stone hall, and gestured for them to follow. "It is the point of Weave that is the furthest upstream. You know that the bodies of riverborn like me don't age. However, humans are not created to be immortal. If one lives for too long and her soul grows weary, she might want to rest in the embrace of shadow." The old woman turned around and looked at her ketch, tied to the pier of the House of Parting. "When that happens, the one leaving comes to the House of Parting. Those who love them come too, to say farewell. They prepare a feast and celebrate. When all is said and done, the weary riverborn set sail to go on their last journey. They sail far, far upstream, until they reach the end of their lifespan and pass away. One way or another." Anank lingered for a while, and then added wistfully, "Actually, I considered going on such a journey too, before receiving a dream of your arrival. Ah. Ironically, I ended up repeating all the same steps, stopping just shy of the last one. It feels strange, to return to the House of Parting from upstream alive." She chuckled and shook her head. "In truth, there are two of these houses. The other one is situated at the furthest point of Weave downstream. All other human cities on the Great River are the same, I'd imagine. The lower house is meant for those who were not given a choice, and died an untimely death. Their bodies, if recovered, are sent downstream, to return to the estuary, the origin of everything. Of course, every outsider departs on their last journey from the lower house, as well." Sunny tilted his head, thinking. If the bodies of all perished outsiders were sent downstream, and the estuary was the source of the defilement, was that how Dusk of Fallen Grace had ended up becoming a nightmare creature? Or had she succumbed to corruption first, and was given the river burial as a result? She had been wearing a burial shroud when they first met, after all. Is she a friend or an enemy? Anank sighed. "My lord and lady. We will spend the night here. I will retrieve some of the supplies I stored on this island, and in the morning, we will continue on the way to Weave proper." There will be more supplies for you to take downstream there, so I hope you don't mind. Sunny felt that spending the night in a place called the House of Parting was a bit ominous, but he was not going to refuse a night of sleeping on solid ground, with a roof over his head, out of superstition. More than that, while he and Nephi's had enjoyed plenty of rest on the way, Anank had mostly stayed awake, controlling the catch and preventing anything dangerous from happening to them. She had to take a break, too. He nodded. Of course. Guide the way. The old woman nodded, and continued walking toward the great hall. Her steps were light and energetic. By the time the 7 suns fell into the river, the 3 of them were inside the House of Parting. The interior of the grand hall was beautiful and solemn, but at the same time strangely modest. The followers of Weaver had not been a prosperous nation, after all. Looking at the decor of the stone hall, Sunny could clearly see which ornaments and decorations had been inherited from the original outsiders, who came from the Dream Realm, and which were crafted by their riverborn descendants. Despite being attentive and earnest artisans, the riverborn were clearly much less sophisticated than their ancestors, not to mention extremely limited in terms of resources. In fact, he was surprised by some of the things he had seen already. The wood that curious, he asked the old woman about it. She smiled. The trees. There are some. There are floating gardens and fields in Weave. There, however, he suddenly wanted something else to happen today. Anank's catch and the pier of the House of Parting were built of, for example. Where had it come from? The fruits that she had treated them to, as well. There was no soil anywhere on the great river, so how could there be trees? How could there be flour to bake pies, and tea leaves to brew tea? Curious, he asked the old woman about it. She smiled. The trees. There are some. There are floating gardens and fields in Weave. They are not too large, of course, because the surface of the city is limited. So, we can only afford to eat fruit, bread, and rice on special occasions. Most of the year, the river people eat what the river gives. Sunny looked down, suddenly feeling guilty. So the delicious food he and Nephi's had been enjoying was something that Anank herself had not tasted often. They were currently in one of the smaller chambers of the House of Parting, the old woman preparing to cook them a late supper. He had been rather complacent in allowing her to take care of them. Mostly because it felt great to be pampered by someone caring and kind, but also because Anank was strangely adamant about treating Sunny and Nephi's with utmost dedication. However, he suddenly wanted something else to happen today. Walking over to the old woman, he gently pushed her away from the table where all the ingredients were waiting to be prepared and cooked. Go rest, Anank. I'll take care of everything. She looked at him with big eyes. But, my lord. Sunny resolutely shook his head. No buts. You don't need to cook. Today, this lord is going to cook for you instead. Throwing an evaluating look at the ingredients, he grinned and added, do you know? I am planning to get rich by opening a restaurant in the future. Then, he paused for a moment, scratched his head, and pointed at Nephi's, who gave him a confused look in response. Sunny smiled brightly. And that is my star chef. Come and help your boss, chef. You don't want to get fired before the restaurant even opens, do you? Chapter 1306, Paths of Ascension. Sunny could not really treat Anank to the staples of the waking world cuisine, since he lacked the ingredients. He couldn't even cook up the few classic military dishes, which were mostly based on using synthetic rations in inventive ways. However, he and Nephi still managed to make a delicious meal. They were awakened, after all, and awakened were supreme masters of turning monster meat into all kinds of delightful dishes. In fact, awakened cuisine was as varied as its basic ingredients were limited. There were some fundamental skills taught to everyone, but each citadel and region of the Dream Realm added its own flavor to the tradition. So, each awakened cook was, in a sense, unique. Take Sunny, for example. His fundamental skills had been taught to him by teacher Julius. Since teacher Julius was anchored in Bastion, Sunny's cooking acquired a hint of Bastion's tradition. Later, it was influenced by the flavor passed down to Nephi's by the Immortal Flame clan, and then assimilated the improvised habits of the sleepers of the Dark City. After that, he absorbed the local tradition of the Chained Isles, as well as learning this and that from the government awakened in Antarctica. Since there was no other awakened whose culinary skills were the result of this exact combination of influences, the flavor of Sunny's cooking was unique. Soon, the chamber was filled with a delicious smell. The meal they prepared was not the most visually stunning, but its fragrance was tantalizing. The meat had just the right amount of crust on the outside, while the insides were juicy and moist. It had absorbed the spices and the heat of the coals, becoming tender enough to melt on the tongue. Still, it didn't look too pretty. Awakened did not really care about the presentation, since their meals were usually eaten in a hurry while keeping one eye out for the prowling abominations. There were some side dishes, at least. Anank tasted the dish presented to her with diligently hidden caution, but then, her eyes widened slightly. Throwing a quick glance at Sunny and Nephi's, she hesitated for a few moments, and then attacked her food like a hungry wolf. Sunny smiled. That's better. It was a far cry from the start of their journey together, when he had to force her to eat even a single small pie. The old woman's appetite was not making him worry anymore. That said, why was she so surprised? Do I not look like a guy who can outcook every damned cook out there? Sunny grimaced. Well, maybe it was because he was going around boasting about how he had eaten nothing but rotten mimic meat for a month. It was only fair for people to doubt his taste after hearing such things. Still, I better get Aiko to do the promotions when I open my restaurant. And, maybe write me a guide on what I should and shouldn't say. He could have the shop and the restaurant in the same building. Customers would come to browse the memories, then have a meal to celebrate the purchase. And he would receive the money for both. Chuckling, Sunny focused on his own portion. Soon, they were done with the supper and were preparing to rest. The house of parting consisted of the main ceremonial hall, several smaller halls, and a scattering of rooms for the departing and their close ones to sleep in before saying the final goodbyes. So, Sunny and Nephi's were going to enjoy sleeping on actual beds tonight, for the first time since leaving the siege capital to participate in the Battle of the Black Skull. Before that, however, all three of them remained around the table, drinking tea and savoring its refreshing warmth. Despite the solemn nature of their surroundings, the atmosphere was light and uplifting. It was hard not to enjoy the simple comforts after spending months in the wilderness. Maybe it was this relaxed mood that prompted Sunny to ask the question he had been hesitating to ask for a while. Putting down his cup, he glanced at the old woman and asked, Anank, can I ask what rank you are? She looked at him curiously. My rank? Why, of course. I have reached transcendence not too long ago, my lord. Sunny nodded slowly. He had initially suspected that Anank was a being of much greater power, but after getting to know her and learning about the fate of Weave, his impression changed. It felt a bit strange to meet an awakened who was 200 years old, but only as powerful as someone like Saint Tyrus. The immortal chain lords notwithstanding. The spell had descended into the waking world only half a century ago, after all, but there were already saints and sovereigns. However, it made sense. The original inhabitants of the Great Realm had not been cursed with as cruel a teacher as the nightmare spell. They had not benefited from its merciless guidance and the lethal necessity to either ascend or die. Even Anank, who was a priestess of the spell and bestowed with some of its powers, did not know anything about nightmares. Without the nightmares, how had the ancient humans even awakened? That was something Sunny had been curious about for a long time. In fact, he knew very little about how the ancient awakened did anything without the spell. He leaned forward a little and asked, his voice full of curiosity, how does one become transcendent? Anank looked at him in surprise. You don't know, my lord. Sunny shook his head. I do know, of course, how one might transcend, in the future, where the nightmare spell controls all these matters. But I don't know how people rose to greater power before. Nephi's pricked her ears, as well. The old woman smiled, lingered for a while, and then said thoughtfully, although my knowledge is limited, I will try to explain as best I can. Let's see. The first step is, of course, to awaken. To awaken, one must gain control over their soul essence, and use that control to form the soul core. Sunny blinked. In that order? Anank did not seem to understand the question. Naturally. How would one form the core without being able to control essence? It is like trying to build a building without bricks. There are some powerful creatures who are born with their soul cores already formed, sure, and have to learn to move there. Learning how to control essence is the hardest part. Forming the core takes time and essence as they mature. But most are born dormant, like us humans. She paused for a moment. Learning how to control essence is the hardest part. Forming the core takes time and effort, but as long as you have the knowledge, success is all but guaranteed. Well, some still fail, of course, and die after their souls collapse. Sunny and Nephi's glanced at each other. So, the ancient humans awakened in the reverse order compared to modern humans, who formed their soul core after the first nightmare and gained the ability to control essence after surviving the first journey to the dream realm. That was how the spell arranged things. Interesting. Nephi's took a sip of her tea and asked, her voice tinged with a hint of curiosity, then how does one learn to control their essence? The awakened of the waking world received the ability to sense their essence from the spell. The intuitive knowledge of how to control it was gifted to them, too. It just took time and practice to turn that control into a practical skill. Most received these gifts after awakening, while Nephi's had to catch up after becoming a master. Anank thought for a few moments. There is no single way to gain control over your soul essence. In fact, it is a unique experience for many. Some spend long years meditating and perfecting their souls, eventually entering a state of unity between mind and soul. Some attune themselves to the world and gather insights about the nature of living things, traveling from realm to realm. Some follow the teachings of great warriors and train their bodies, testing themselves through hardship and battle. Some even receive sudden epiphanies in a moment of dire crisis with no preparation whatsoever. She hesitated for a bit. However, there is a path that anyone can walk, both the simplest and the most dangerous, as well as the most vile. Sunny raised an eyebrow. And what is that path? Anank sighed. It is to absorb soul essence that has already awakened. Through killing those who have already awakened, and plundering their soul shards. Her face turned grim. The awakened essence already knows how to be controlled, so when it is mixed with the essence of dormant beings, it will change that essence. A little. Absorb enough of it, and your essence will awaken, too. Things were simple during the Age of Heroes, when many corrupted prowled the realms, and humans had to battle them to survive. But as the eras changed and there were fewer monsters to kill, some humans and noble creatures turned to killing each other, instead. Chapter 1307, Before the nightmare spell the old woman fell silent. Sunny and Nephi's were somber, too. It was too easy to imagine what vile acts those who lusted for power could commit in a world that rewarded murder with strength. In fact, the same vileness could have consumed the waking world, where absorbing the essence of slain humans was easier than hunting down countless nightmare creatures. If not for the government and people like Jet, who maintained order and suppressed the darker side of the awakened society with an iron fist, things would have turned grim long ago. Legacy clans also played their part, preventing human enclaves in the dream realm from spiraling into lawlessness. Eventually, Sunny sighed and shook his head. So, once your soul essence awakens and you can control it, the next step is to patiently work on forming the soul core. What happens then? Anank smiled and pointed to her chest, where the soul core of a human was usually located. Accumulation of power. Ascension is a step of rising above one's mortal nature by improving the quality of their essence, and their body as well. This step can be slow if one refines themselves naturally, or fast, if one improves their essence by absorbing the essence of stronger beings. Once the soul essence reaches a qualitative change, the soul core will reform itself and grow stronger, as well. Of course, it won't happen without some conscious refinement, either. Sunny tilted his head. How does one refine their essence, exactly? Anank laughed. It's not something I can explain in one conversation. There are methods and techniques, the knowledge of which has been accumulated over countless generations and is taught to disciples over many years. Even then, very few manage to succeed. Of course, all those who do succeed have to find the way into their soul sea first. Without the ability to enter the soul sea, it would take one many lifetimes to ascend even with the best refinement technique. She shook her head with a smile. At least that is how it is for us humans. Some of the noble creatures have their own ways. They can possess multiple soul cores, as well, and walk the path of ascension more naturally. Sunny blinked a couple of times. Wait. People have to learn how to enter their soul seas. The old woman nodded matter-of-factly. Of course. That is, without the guidance of the nightmare spell. Weaver gave us mortals a gift that can hasten each step on the path of ascension, including the discovery of one's soul sea. That's unexpected. Everyone just assumed that being able to access the soul sea was a natural ability of all awakened, including sleepers. As it turned out, that was another thing that the spell had simplified for the humans of the waking world. Ruthless, relentless, and immensely effective. That is how the spell is. The more Sunny learned about the nightmare spell, the more he realized how ingenious and cruelly effective it was in helping. No, forcing people to become stronger, stronger, and stronger still, until they either rose as high as they could and higher than that, or died. For what purpose, he did not know. Nephi sighed. What about transcendence? Anank nodded. Transcendence is different. It is not just about accumulation. It is a step of profound transformation, where a mortal assumes the first qualities of the divine. The soul essence has to become much more potent, the soul core has to become much more voluminous. Most importantly, an awakened has to become one with the world and be recognized by it. Their soul has to be expanded beyond the confines of the body and the world. Be it water, wind, shadow, light, or something else entirely. And, therefore, the most important step an ascended human has to take to achieve fused, to a small extent, with the world. It is hard to explain with words, forgive me. Sunny tilted his head, thinking. Anank's words did indeed sound very vague and esoteric, but he felt that he understood what she was talking about. It was like when Saint Tyrus appeared and the sunlight seemed to shift a little, as if wishing to be close to her. The world itself responded to the transcendent, and even bent to their will sometimes. Then again, it also responded to a few people below the transcendent rank. Like Nephi's, or Jet, or Sunny himself. That was peculiar. Anank took a sip of tea and added, her voice bright, of course, the connection between a transcendent and the world is not all-encompassing. Rather, it is a connection to one or, very rarely, several aspects of the world. Be it water, wind, shadow, light, or something else entirely. And, therefore, the most important step an ascended human has to take to achieve transcendence is to awaken their aspect. Sunny and Nephi's looked at each other in confusion. Awaken their aspect. What do you mean? The old woman coughed. But that is exactly what I mean. That one must possess an aspect to transcend. Sunny massaged his temples. Wait. Don't all awakened possess an aspect? Anank chuckled. Of course not. Every awakened human possesses the potential to realize an aspect, but there are plenty of those who never do. Maybe even most. However, the higher you rise on the path of ascension, the harder it becomes to move further without claiming your aspect, as well as your flaw. It is impossible to transcend without them. That information was truly shocking. Neither Sunny nor Nephi's could digest it quickly. Awakened without aspects. There was such a thing. Sunny tried to remember every human he had fought in the first and second nightmares. Had all of them shown aspect abilities? He really couldn't remember. Or rather, he could not tell based on his memories. Nephi's, meanwhile, frowned and asked, her voice full of contemplation, why is it that only humans possess aspects? Why don't creatures? Noble creatures. Have them as well. To the humans of the waking world, everything that was not a human was a nightmare creature. But, of course, Sunny had learned a long time ago that this wasn't the case. There were humans, and there were creatures, like the original saint or nightmare. It was only after they succumbed to corruption did the noble creatures, as Anank called such beings, become abominations. The problem was that there were only humans in the waking world, while every creature in the dream realm was already corrupted. That was why the concept of something that was not human, but also not abominable, was hard to accept. However, in the ancient times, humans and noble creatures lived side by side. Nevertheless, their difference between them was the same. Humans could only rise in rank, but possessed aspects, while noble creatures rose both in rank and class, but had no aspects of their own. So, the question Nephi's asked was indeed interesting. Anank smiled. Why, it is because noble creatures were created by the gods, while we humans weren't. Sunny blinked. Huh. He did know that creating living things was an authority exclusive to the gods, which was why Nether's feat of making Saint and her people was so remarkable. Now, he learned that all creatures were the result of the gods exercising that authority. But what did Ankh mean when she said that humans weren't made the same way? Sunny frowned. There was an ever-changing void, where desire was born. From it came direction. Noticing their confusion, she chuckled. Humans weren't created by anyone, and instead just appeared from the same stuff the gods were born from. It's just that. If the gods were the flame, then we humans were tiny sparks that shot out as the bonfire was dying out. Nevertheless, we come from the same source. Which is why all humans possess the potential to become divine, as well as the ability to awaken an aspect. Why the path of ascension is open to us. Sunny frowned. There was an ever-changing void, where desire was born. From it came direction, and the gods. He still did not really understand the meaning of these mysterious words, but if Ankh was telling the truth, and not just retelling baseless myths, humans came from the desire and direction as well, just as the gods had. He shook his head. All right. I can understand that. But why did you say that it's not only an aspect that is required to transcend, but also the flaw? The old woman sighed. Because one can't exist without the other. Imperfection is also an absolute law, just like death. And so, nothing is flawless. Even the world itself is flawed. Even the gods, who were born flawless, are not perfect anymore. And so, we humans are flawed, too. She smiled and added, her voice calm, but that is a good thing. Flawless things are perfect, and so, they can never improve. They can never grow. They can only remain still and unchanging, which is no different from being dead. Being flawed is the essence of life, my lord and lady. It is also the essence of growth. After all, what is life if not a constant struggle to grow and improve?